Worst job in college football. Welcome back to the program. He's Caleb Calhoun. I'm Dave Hooker. What is the worst job in college football? Because this comes up with the unfortunate, very just terrible situation at Northwestern. And I never thought that was a great job. I thought that Northwestern tried to go all in. Frankly, Caleb, in terms of building a program, I thought it got a little too big, and that's why you see something like this happen. In case you don't know, they have one of the best training facilities in the entire nation. But worst coaching jobs in college football. What do you got? Start me from 10, bring me down, and I'm going to tell you if I agree or disagree.
Okay, so starting at 10, and people are forgetting this because Deion Sanders is there, but it's Colorado. Colorado has dealt with the fallout of the Gary Barnett scandal in 2005 and has never really recovered from that, nor have they recovered from USC reemerging as a program, which happened under Pete Carroll, obviously, in 2001. And those two things are connected in the sense that you brought this up to me, and I didn't even think about this until you told me. Colorado's program under Bill McCartney was built on going into Compton in Southern California and getting kids out of there. The minute USC reemerged as a program, they kept those kids in California. Colorado lost their recruiting base. There's no real pipeline there. And unless Deion Sanders can use his splash to get people, it's just a really bad and hard job to win at now.
No, I agree. Now, NIL could change all of these on this list, right? In 5 years, this could be a different conversation. But what we think right now, I totally agree with you. Colorado is a tough job, and that's why he took it, because he wasn't going to get offered an incredible job. All right, South Carolina. You've got it number 9. We've got a lot of South Carolina fans that listen to the program. Why South Carolina?
So I do expectations relative to possibility. And South Carolina had back-to-back Hall of Fame coaches. Lou Holtz never did better than 9-3. Now, Steve Spurrier did win the East and then had 3 straight 11-2 seasons when the East was at its absolute worst during that time. And I think many people have kind of agreed that that's the max of what can be done there. Steve Spurrier didn't finish in the top 25 more times than he did at South Carolina. And here's the problem with South Carolina. And again, and I could change this. I don't know if South Carolina will have that, but you're stuck in the you're playing second fiddle to Clemson in recruiting in your home state already, which is an issue. But then on top of that, you're stuck in the SEC, so your competition is way more fierce. And the combination of those two things makes it really hard. Even though there's elite talent in the state of South Carolina, there's not enough to go around for South Carolina and Clemson. So you split that, plus you have to play in the SEC. It just makes it too difficult.
Yeah, it's just hard for me to imagine South Carolina climbing from where they are and being a very, very respectable SEC East program with Georgia not only being what they are, but their recruiting base, with Tennessee having the historic ability to win championships and recruit at a high level, and then Florida being where they are. It's really difficult for me to imagine South Carolina overcoming those 3 programs on a year in and year out basis. Arizona State you had before we get to another SEC program that has a tie to Tennessee.
So Arizona State's on this list because I tracked, and their expectations are delusional. Did you know that the last 8 coaches at Arizona State have been fired coming off either a winning season or a bowl appearance? And that includes, by the way, a former Tennessee defensive coordinator, Larry Marmey. And They fired him in 1991. They fired Bruce Snyder 2 years after he went 11-1. For those who don't know, when Tennessee won the national title, I think Arizona State finished 3rd that year, going 11-1. And 2 years later, they fired Bruce Snyder, who led them to that. They have these massive expectations, but it's not a great job. Arizona State doesn't care that much about football, so it's not that intriguing. Arizona's not a bad football state overall. It's like 23rd in terms of NFL talent, where it comes from, but you're splitting that with Arizona. And on top of that, the California schools can come in and take it. So the expectations don't match the possibilities at Arizona State.
Then a couple of SEC schools. So if you want to match expectations with what's actually going to happen, you've got Ole Miss at number 7. Slight pushback here. I don't know that Ole Miss, their expectations are nearly as high as the Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee's, LSU's, Texas A&M's of the world. I think to some extent, football on a Saturday in Oxford is something fun to do, and unless you screw that up, which would mean, I guess, no sport coats or no cocktail dresses, I think that Ole Miss is okay being relevant.
They fired David Cutcliffe a year after winning the East because of one losing season,
But I
which
can
was
give but I can give you a little inside info. They told David Cutcliffe they wanted a significant coaching change, and he fought for his guys. So I don't think he would have lost his job, but he would have had another year.
But what gave them the right to tell Cutcliffe they wanted a significant coaching change? I mean, they with the staff, they went 10-3 in 2003. And by the way, if Eli Manning doesn't trip over his offensive lineman's foot, Ole Miss wins the East that year because they beat LSU. Or if Ole Miss has a semi decent kicker, they win the the West that year. So I just and then they fired Houston Nutt, then they fired Matt Luke. I mean, they've they want to recreate the glory days of the Johnny Vaught years in the early 60s. And I'm going to say this with Ole Miss, and I brought it up. However you feel about things, when college football integrated was right when Ole Miss stopped being a powerhouse program, and it had to do with their embracement of the Confederacy all the way until the 2010s. You can feel however you feel about it. It didn't sit well with a lot of recruits.
No, very true. And I've been there when the flags were still flying. The rebel flag was still flying within the stadium. Missouri, I would think that Missouri's a worse job than Ole Miss, and but I don't think Ole Miss is as bad of a job as you do. Again, I go back to Missouri. Whether they're in whether they're in the East, West, or this new no division sort of thing they got going on, how's Missouri going to top the greatest programs, in some cases, history of Texas, Oklahoma, LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee? I mean, how did they ever overcome that? I just don't see it being a thing. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be stunned if they went to the Super Conference at one point and Missouri got left out. They don't have the same handshake agreements that, say, a Vanderbilt does, that you're never going to get left out of the SEC because they're new to the SEC, relatively new. I think Missouri could be a non-factor across the board in college football by 2035. I think it's a terrible job, a terribly tough place to win. They don't do much for me at all.
Yeah, it's funny because they're trying, the SEC's trying to market this Arkansas-Missouri rivalry in football right now, like this border war, because the states are somewhat culturally similar, divided by the Ozarks. But the problem with that rivalry is that this Arkansas can go into Texas and get some rejects from Texas and Texas A&M, which is enough to build a pretty decent football program. They can go into Louisiana maybe and get a couple of LSU rejects. Those rejects are still pretty darn good. And so they can actually build a decent program with that. Missouri can't do that. And Gary Pinkel maxed out what could be done at Missouri, but everybody forgets when Missouri was doing that and playing so well, that was after Nebraska had fallen off, and the Big 12 North was just the most garbage division in all of college football during that time, during the mid-2000s. And
counting down, you've got number 5, Texas Tech, a terrible job. It looked like that was going to be a really good job when Mike Leach was there before Craig James got involved. That number 5, it surprised me to see it on the list just because I hadn't thought about it. I can't argue that it's number 5 on your list.
Yeah, so the problem with Texas Tech is you think, oh, they're in Texas, they can recruit. They're in Lubbock. All the talent's in East Texas. Who wants to go? Dave, tell me, who lives in the Dallas, Houston, San Antonio area wants to go out to Lubbock to play football?
Nobody.
Exactly, nobody. And also, Texas Tech is cheap. I firmly believe they sided with Craig James' son because they wanted to get out of having to pay that contract extension that they gave Mike Leach. And they would rather be cheap than win. So I would encourage coaches to never take that job.
Vanderbilt. Now, I will say this. The expectations are low, but maybe James Franklin raised them a little bit. But you had them number 4 on your list. Why?
Yes. So I did say there's a long leash at Vanderbilt, and it did propel James Franklin to a higher coaching job. That's usually not going to happen. I consider Vanderbilt, Duke, and Stanford all like in a similar playing field, but Duke's in the ACC, Stanford's in the Pac-12. You can win at those schools at the lower level. Vanderbilt, it's just almost impossible. And then on top of that, the college football experience at Vanderbilt, if you're a head coach, is miserable. I mean, I've never seen a more apathetic program if you're coaching there, honestly.
Nebraska, you have at number 3, which would really make some Cornhusker fans mad. But you're right. That was a place they found a little niche of taking these undersized walk-ons and growing them into big Cornhuskers, and that worked. That ain't working anymore. There's just too much of a difference between a 2-star prospect and a 4-star prospect, or a 3 and a 5. At some point, one dude 6'5", 325 pounds naturally, and the other dude's 6'2", 260 pounds, and has to beef up the best he can. I totally agree. I know that's part of your reasoning, but there's more.
Yeah, the worst jobs in college football are the ones where you're at top 10 programs that honestly aren't in places where they're capable of being top 10 programs anymore, because they expect you to be a top 10 program, but Nebraska is not even a top 25 program in terms of what they can be. And so the expectation doesn't match the reality, and it's going to take an insane level of creativity to get it back to where they are. So yeah, I think you go to Nebraska. I mean, you're going to Nebraska. How many different coaches have tried a new offensive approach at Nebraska between Mike Riley, Bill Callahan, Scott Frost? They've all failed, like miserably failed, spectacularly failed, honestly.
And if Scott Frost couldn't be the guy with his ties to Nebraska and is somewhat innovative, he's not at a Josh Heupel or Lane Kiffin level as far as innovative offenses. Is if he can't succeed there, I don't know where they go moving forward. You got Northwestern, who we talked about. There are high expectations at Northwestern. There's a reason that Northwestern, and it was a big story with Pat Fitzgerald, and it happened during a slow news time, but there was a reason it was a lead story on ESPN. It's because a lot of ESPN cats went there. So they expect a lot out of that school. And now you would have to follow Fitzgerald, and now you're going to have to deal with a modicum, not the same amount of the Penn State thing where you said you wouldn't even want your son or daughter to go there, not even football, but just go there. They're going to have to deal with some of that as well. So I think that's significant. But number 1 is Notre Dame, and it looks insane on the list. It looks insane, but it is. And I want to hear your reasoning, and I've read the column. It's on offthehooksports.com. But here's the big reason to me. 2 things coaches want control of, at least partial control, at least strong control. Admissions. There needs to be a Judy or a Bob that you can call in the admissions office and say, I really need to get this guy in. He's close. Notre Dame, no. They don't help you at all. As far as punishment, okay, let's say you're Kirby Smart and your 18th player or 80th player just got caught speeding in the Atlanta area. You want to be able to call and say, he's really, really good. You can't do that at Notre Dame. You have no control over discipline or admissions, and college coaches will tell you, including Brian Kelly, who went to LSU, that is why that is such a terrible job. And it may be beautiful, and the campus is awesome, and it's got a lot of tradition, but right now, unless they change those things, which they could in a heartbeat, it is just not an elite job anymore, which sounds insane for anybody over the age of 30, 35.
Oh yeah, it's not. And it doesn't help that. So you have those hamstring limits, but then you have a delusional fan base and administration that thinks they're the best job in America. And here's what they think. I'm dead serious about this, Dave. Have you ever heard anybody make the case for Notre Dame as a good job now? What do they say? They say 2 things I brought up yesterday on my delusional overrated factors for a program. They'll brag about being on NBC every week. Well, every college football program's on national TV every week now, so that doesn't matter anymore. And then they say they can recruit national because the Notre Dame brand will reach out to a kid in California. No, it won't. No, it won't. Brands don't recruit. And Tennessee made this mistake for 10 years with their hires. They thought the Tennessee brand alone could recruit. You can't recruit on your brand. You have to recruit on what you can sell a player for his future and the excitement that they can enjoy on campus. Notre Dame doesn't think they have to do that.
Well, brands need to be like Nike or Adidas or something like that, something that's relevant. They're like Puma. I mean, their brand used to be relevant. It's not relevant anymore. So if you
no high school athlete remembers them winning was alive when they won a national title.
Some of their parents weren't alive. When was their last national title?
89. Yeah, 89.
Some of their parents weren't alive almost. I mean, that's not an incredible stretch. If you have a child that's 16 and now he's 17 and he's going through the recruiting process, and
Yeah,
there's probably that's not crazy. It's not a huge reach.
it's not. It's not. That's a very good point. And they don't want to accept that they're going the route of Georgia Tech or Pittsburgh, who were, as you know this, Dave, Georgia Tech was the essence of football in the South in the 1920s and the 1930s. And Pittsburgh was the essence of football in the nation during that time. And outside of a nice little spike with Johnny Majors when Tony Dorsett landed in his lap, Pittsburgh has been nothing in college football since then.
Yep.